Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and I just spent 600,000 Stardust to build one of the best Ultra League Pokemon that almost no one is using right now, and that is XL Ice Beam Ludicolo. What makes Ludicolo a very interesting core breaker for the current Open Ultra League meta is its unique Grass-Water typing. It allows it to completely wall off Tinkaton and beat it. It beats a lot of the water types even without running Leaf Storm, and the Ice Beam tech also helps you pick up critical wins against mons like Parisian and Zygarde. I paired it up with a Shadow Toucanon and a Stunfisk and went on a 9-3 run with this team, around 3200 elo. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1 we pick up a very strong lead, leading Ludicolo into Tinkaton. Now this is always a winning matchup for Ludicolo just by virtue of the fact that Gigaton Hammer is going to be resisted. Gigaton is still an incredibly efficient move, but XL Ludicolo is stupidly bulky. Ludicolo is able to survive 2 Gigaton Hammers pretty comfortably, and will always be able to win the zeros. The way that I typically like to play out this matchup is actually not to fire off the final Weather Ball, but instead I usually like to bank the Weather Ball and then aggressively pivot into Shadow Toucanon. Tinkaton leads can never really have electric types behind it because then they'd be ABA weak to ground, so that makes this Toucanon pivot basically unanswerable from my opponent. They simultaneously switch into Feraligatr, and this is exactly where Shadow Toucanon wants to be. Toucanon has identical pacing, but will always win charge attack priority, and that means this Feraligatr just has nowhere it can run. The fact that my opponent's shielding, however, makes me think they're going to try and play out the 2s and then go for a catch. That's their only path forward in this game. They can't ever really do any kind of fast move pressure on a Toucanon because the Shadow Claws are double resisted, so I'm just going to farm up 5 Pecks and then switch into Ludicolo, anticipating them to go for the catch. They go for the catch, they do not get it. I'm able to make the Weather Ball into Tinkaton, so Ludicolo able to get some very nice work into the Tinkaton, and I still have a ton of energy banked on Toucanon for later in the game. My opponent waits down the timer, they bring in Swampert, and Swampert is unfortunately going to get absolutely destroyed by a Beak Blast. Beak Blast will inflict devastating damage onto the Swampert. Swampert barely survives, but now that they're debuffed, the Hydro Cannon is going to fall short of taking the knockout. I can now switch into Stunfisk as they bring in Feraligatr, and the guaranteed win condition for me is just to never throw any energy on the Stunfisk. Feraligatr will be able to make a last second Hydro Cannon and knock me out, but my opponent has no ability to damage Toucanon. They have Shadow Claw and Mud Shot. They're never making another move. So I peck down Feraligatr, peck down the Swampert, and we're able to take the win. We move to game number 2, picking up a pretty negative lead, Ludicolo into Clefable. Now what makes the Clefable lead so bad for this team is what it's paired with. Clefable is almost always paired with Unova Stunfisk. Clefable has no answer to Talonflame and no answer to Steel, and Stunfisk covers them both. Now having a Shadow Toucanon in the back means that I'm desperately going to need switch advantage, so I will put up the shield as my opponent goes for the Moonblast. They're going to make Moonblast number 2. I just overfarm massively, and I can't really afford to go down 2 shields, but I will look to farm them into range where I can knock out with the Weather Ball. But my opponent opts out. They save Clefable, and they make a Weather Ball catch onto Poliwrath. Poliwrath, not what I was expecting to see in the back, but Toucanon is going to do quite well here. I have to save my Stunfisk for what I'm assuming is going to be their own Stunfisk in the back, look to overfarm as much as I can, and then CMP tie Drill Peck to the Icy Wind. Poliwrath's pacing Mudshot to Icy Wind is 5-4. It is incredibly fast. I don't really want to give up the Toucanon just yet, so I will put up the shield as they go for their Icy Wind. Switch timer's up, and there it is. There is the Unova Stunfisk that I was worried about. This is a very heavily debuffed Beak Blast, so it's not going to do much. But the real victory is the fact that their Mud Bombs are going to be doing a lot less damage than they typically would in the Stunfisk mirror. And that is very, very helpful. I'm just going to keep farming. Every Mud Bomb they throw while debuffed is a victory for me, because my Stunfisk is going to be outside of range where a third Mud Bomb can take me out. I'm now at the back-to-back Mud Bombs. My opponent's switch timer will be coming up here pretty soon. I decided to throw one in the move, and they do get the catch onto Clefable. Clefable was pretty close to a Meteor Mash. I go for an Undercharge, but unfortunately, it is still enough damage to secure the KO. If my opponent brings back in the Stunfisk, they can make a Mud Bomb, but I believe I'm still outside of range. So they fire off the Mud Bomb, I survive, and that should be game winning, because I have a lot of energy stored on that Ludicolo in the back. So I fire off Mud Bomb, that gets the shield, in comes Ludicolo, there's the snipe with the Weather Ball, and that is going to secure it. With Stunfisk out of the picture, all that's left is a very low HP Poliwrath. And Poliwrath is on Mudshot, which gives them very fast energy generation, but unfortunately means they can never farm down Ludicolo. Ludicolo gets the Astonish down, and we take the win. Hopping into game number 3, leading Ludicolo into Bellibolt, I imagine this is a slightly negative lead. My opponent, however, pivots out, and they send in Florges. I now have to win switch advantage at all costs. I have a Toucanon and a Stunfisk in the back. If I have switch advantage, I should be in a really good spot to win the game. If I don't have switch advantage, then I'm going to automatically lose, as Bellibolt is going to shred my poor Tinkaton. This Florges is not on Disarming Voice or Trailblaze, they're actually on Moonblast, and that Moonblast did do a considerable amount of damage. My opponent shields up the Florges. They really want to make a play for Switch, but I know that I need Switch no matter the cost. So I put up the shield. They full send the Moonblast, knowing that the double resisted Chilling Water would not have been enough to secure the KO. I now get to fire off Weather Ball, KO the Florges, and win Switch advantage. In comes Bellibolt, looking for a farm down, but look at Ludicolo go. The bulk of Ludicolo is just absolutely absurd. My opponent exits with energy, just to be met with Stunfisk. In the back is Virizion, and this game is over. Winning Switch advantage in that matchup was everything. I would have gotten completely destroyed without Switch advantage, but the good news is, with Switch, we are going to get this win. I put up the shield, protecting against a Rogue Stone Edge, but it is just going to be the back-to-back Sacred Swords. Sacred Sword does do quite a lot of damage to Shadow Tinkaton. Shadow Tinkaton is very frail, but Tinkaton's able to hang on and make it to the Beak Blast. Keep in mind, this is a resisted charge stack onto one of the Ultra League's bulkiest Pokemon, but Shadow Tinkaton just simply does not care. I get to send back on the Stunfisk, fire off the Mud Bomb, and Ludicolo was a real MVP in that game, being able to KO the Florges, win Switch advantage, and set up the backline to get the win. We get a pretty rough lead in the next match, Ludicolo into Kyurem. This is a matchup where having Ice Beam will be a definite plus. The Astonishes add up quite a bit, and the Ice Beam even debuffed will do a considerable amount of damage onto the Kyurem. I'm hoping my opponent just lets this go, because this team is actually quite soft to Kyurem. I fire off the Ice Beam, but my opponent knows if I'm staying in, I'm core broken, so unfortunately for me, they will put up the shield. I'm just going to fully sacrifice the Ludicolo at this point. The Ludicolo has done its job, it got me a shield advantage, and now I have to hope that Shadow Tinkaton, up energy, but at -1 attack, is going to be able to somehow sweep this game. Stunfisk is also a pretty bad matchup into Kyurem, so I couldn't really afford to bring in the Stunfisk. But I get a nice overfarm, and I take the knockout with the Drill Peck. My opponent now sends in Runerigus, and if this is what they send in, they clearly do not have a flying resist in the back. I go straight for the debuff Beak Blast, that does huge damage. I bank energy and send in Stunfisk. Stunfisk has a terrible matchup into Runerigus, but the worst move they can throw at me here is a Shadow Ball, and that's not going to do much. In the back, my opponent has Turtonator. That's a Pokemon that really doesn't like taking Beak Blasts either. My Stunfisk up energy is now in such a commanding position. I get Mud Bomb after Mud Bomb after Mud Bomb and really get to just ramp up the pressure on this Turtonator. Unfortunately for my opponent, I am not in a range where Dragon Claw will knock out. They're going to need to go for the Overheat. Turtonator goes for the Dragon Claw, but Stunfisk survives. I'm just simply too bulky, and that's going to force all 100 of my opponent's energy. Now I can just send in Tinkaton. Tinkaton will take the knockout with the Drill Peck, and there's just no path forward for my opponent. Runerigus has a little bit of energy, but they have absolutely no fast move pressure. In comes Runerigus, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. We get a great lead in the next match, Ludicolo into Shadow Feraligatr. My opponent save switches into Corviknight, I throw 3 Astonishes, and then respond with Stunfisk. That Ludicolo matchup into Feraligatr, even though I'm not running Leaf Storm, Ludicolo actually wins the 0s and 1s straight Weather Ball. You don't even need Leaf Storm to beat Feraligatr. That is how dominant that matchup is. Even though the Corviknight got a pretty massive energy head start, I'm counting on the fact that Ludicolo energy will be valuable endgame, and Stunfisk does a really nice job of shutting down Corviknight. Corviknight can land 2 paybacks, but that's not enough damage to secure the knockout. I'm able to fire off the Discharge, and even though this won't take the knockout, it should put them into farm down range. My opponent is going to make a last-second Air Cutter, but this is an XL Stunfisk. I'm no shielding confident I can survive, and I do get the farm down with only 1 HP remaining. I'm just going to be blind throwing Discharge into whatever gets brought in here, and my opponent sends out Feraligatr. Discharge, not a particularly powerful attack, but does get the shield, and now I send in Shadow Tinkaton. I'm just going to look to overfarm massively. My opponent tries to go for the CMP tie, but I'm more than happy to put up the shield and just look to farm. My opponent's going to have to go for a catch at some point. There it is, they fail the catch, and in the back, they have Tinkaton, so another team that is pretty soft to Ludicolo. I'm really not a believer of Ludicolo in the Great League, so I am a little bit surprised at how strong Ludicolo felt in the Ultra League, but I feel that it is the correct anti-meta play right now. Even though the Ice Beam tech didn't end up being super valuable in a lot of the games that I played, I'm not in an ELO range where I was encountering a lot of Zygarde and Virizion. I know they're a lot more common in other ELO ranges, and I think that the Ice Beam tech would be a very big plus on Ludicolo. I end up predicting my opponent to switch out there, simultaneous switch Tinkaton into Feraligatr. Drill Peck takes the knockout. All that's left is the very low health Tinkaton. My opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We move to the next game, leading Ludicolo into Swampert. Now this is a pretty nice matchup unless they're running Sludge. My opponent pivots out, they send in Feraligatr, and I decide to send out Stunfisk. I feel pretty okay just fully sacrificing the Stunfisk. In hindsight, maybe I should have brought in the Tinkaton, however, because Tinkaton has a very dominant matchup as long as I switch in pretty quickly. Because Tinkaton can always tank a Hydro Cannon. It's only Ice Beam that I would be particularly threatened by. But being down energy, I've now thrown away the entire Stunfisk, and I really have to hope that Stunfisk was not going to be good into what they have in the back. I decide instead to play for a massive Ludicolo farm. My opponent is going to make an Ice Beam, but Ludicolo is very comfortable tanking that damage. So I tank the Ice Beam, get the farm down. What do they have in the back? They can't really afford to bring in the Swampert here. My opponent waits down the timer. They bring in Empoleon, and I should not have brought the Stunfisk into the Feraligatr. Throwing away the Stunfisk may have just cost me the game. My opponent no shields, calling that I wouldn't go for the Leaf Storm. I build up to the Leaf Storm this time, and I'm able to get the shield. With the shield advantage, I can now send in Tinkaton, and Tinkaton is going to be an absolute nightmare up energy. I shield up as Empoleon goes for the Hydro Cannon. I'm going to try and overfarm as much as possible, and I'm going to end up committing both shields. I just need to land a Beak Blast onto the Swampert and a Drill Peck onto the Empoleon. I fire off Drill Peck, they get the catch, and that is an incredible play from my opponent. Now I'm forced to waste a second Drill Peck's worth of energy just to get rid of the Swampert, and that is energy that I could not afford to waste. I'm quickly running out of options. My win cons now come down to catching a Hydro Cannon onto Ludicolo, or debuffing them with a Beak Blast and surviving a -1 Drill Peck on the Ludicolo. I'm going to farm up, go for the catch. I don't get the catch, and the game comes down to this. Can I survive the Drill Peck? Empoleon's Drill Peck lands, Ludicolo survives. I make the Weather Ball, but the Metal Sound KOs, and unfortunately, that is going to be a loss. Many win cons in that game, but I did not play well. My opponent played incredibly, and we will lose that game. We move to the next match, and we're back in very familiar territory, leading Ludicolo into Tinkaton. Again, this matchup is just so comfortable for the Ludicolo. If you want to stay in and play it out, you can always win the zeros, but I really like exchanging 2 Weather Balls for 2 Gigaton Hammers, and then banking the Ludi energy and hard pivoting into the Tinkaton. Because so many of these backlines of Tinkaton lead teams feature Pokemon like Feraligatr that just have absolutely nothing for an energy advantage Tinkaton. I fire off Weather Ball number 2, they're going to fire off Gigaton Hammer number 2, and this Ludicolo, it's really surprised me. It has put in so much work as a Corebreaker. I send in Tinkaton, there's the Feraligatr. They're so far behind on energy that I'm able to make a Beak Blast as they make Hydro Cannon number 1. Beak Blast does get shielded. Feraligatr would have been one-hit KO'd, and Feraligatr will now get to fire off debuffed Hydro Cannons. And suddenly I realize, it's a debuffed non-Shadow Hydro Cannon. Shadow Tinkaton basically can't take any hits, but I think I can survive this one. So I end up no shielding. I'm going to look to farm up, wait the turn, but I accidentally end up waiting 2 turns instead of 1, a huge misplay, and that's going to allow my opponent to outpace me. That is a pretty massive error on my part. I should have just not waited the turn, or waited 1 turn instead of waiting 2 turns. I'm going to watch for my opponent to try and go for the catch. They go for it, and I send in Ludicolo into Tinkaton. Tinkaton makes a Bulldoze, but that's okay by me because I can peck down the Tinkaton, and I just have way too much energy on this Tinkaton. If I see the Feraligatr get brought in, I'm going to go for the Drill Peck. If it's anything other than Feraligatr, I'm going to be firing off Beak Blast. I see the Water typing, that's Feraligatr. I'm going to knock them out with the Drill Peck, and I will have the Beak Blast for whatever my opponent has in the back. It's a Dust Noir. They were triple weak. They had nothing for Ludicolo. Beak Blast annihilates Dust Noir. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We pick up a slightly negative lead in the next match, Ludicolo into Pangoro. Astonish is resisted, so this isn't an amazing matchup, but Ludicolo is so bulky in the Ultra League that Pangoro will have to debuff itself with close combat if it wants to deal any kind of meaningful damage. They close combat, try for a catch onto Dust Noir, but I have a very strong answer to Dust Noir, as I can now send in Shadow Tinkaton. Shadow Dynamic Punch would just about take the knockout here. Tinkaton can survive, but at this point my opponent is double weak to Tinkaton, so I'm very heavily invested in protecting its HP. So I build up to the back-to-back Drill Pecks, knock out the Dust Noir, in the back is Talonflame, and this game is over. I have a Beak Blast, I have a Stunfisk, I have a ton of energy on Ludicolo, opponent no shields the Beak Blast, and they will resign the match. Hopping to the final match, leading Ludicolo into Shadow Golurk. Golurk is a Pokemon I haven't seen in quite some time, but this is an incredible lead. Golurk staying in, look at the Astonishes, Ludicolo absolutely shredding. I'm just going to fire off the Weather Ball as soon as I get it. Weather Ball does not land because in that position my opponent resigns the match. If they're top left to the match that early, I have to imagine they were just triple weak to the Ludicolo. They had nothing for the Dancing Pineapple whatsoever, and figured it was just better off to save the time and concede the match instead of playing it out. All in all, I'm very happy that it appears that Ludicolo is finally a playable Pokemon in the Open Ultra League. Unfortunately, I didn't feel like I really got to showcase the utility of Ice Beam on Ludicolo in these particular battles, as I just didn't really run into very many Virizion or Zygarde, but I do feel pretty strongly that Ice Beam is the way to go on this Pokemon. Ice Beam allows you to have pretty dominant matchups into Zygarde across the board, where you don't have to rely on bait nuke shenanigans with trying to land a Leaf Storm. You can just go straight Ice Beam and Zygarde gets absolutely melted. I really appreciate that Ludicolo is a Pokemon that can not only shred through a lot of the ground type Pokemon, but with Ice Beam it can also beat Virizion. That's a very difficult duo to core break, because usually Virizion plus like a Unova Stunfisk, for example, is a very strong core that's very difficult to break, but Ludicolo does a very strong job of breaking that duo. So I was honestly very impressed with Ludicolo. They had an event where Lotad was spawning, and I figured may as well try and grind the XLs in case it ever ends up being usable. I spent the Stardust, and I really wasn't expecting much. I had a hunch based on going through a lot of common teams on PvPoke that Ludicolo could be a core breaker, but honestly it exceeded my wildest expectations. I would argue that Ludicolo is an extremely playable anti-Metamon. It may even qualify as like the very bottom tier of meta. It's very strong, it's very bulky, it has very strong coverage across the board, and it pairs incredibly well with Unova Stunfisk. As Stunfisk does such a nice job at shutting down the few Pokemon that Ludicolo doesn't want to encounter, which is mainly going to be Pokemon like Poisons and Flyers, and outside of that, Ludicolo can pretty much deal with the rest. To be honest, I don't think that Shadow Toucanon honestly has amazing synergy with Ludicolo, but I find it very difficult to construct Open Ultra League teams without heavily considering the Shadow Toucanon. Toucanon is the ultimate Pokemon in the Ultra League if you can get just a little bit of an energy head start or shield advantage that it can just completely run away with games. I did really appreciate the fact that there were a few times when Ludicolo didn't have the greatest matchups, and those were the games where Shadow Toucanon was able to shine. Ludicolo was often able to get Pokemon low, and then Shadow Toucanon up just a little bit of energy, does what it does best, which is be an absolute terror onto opponents' backlines. I think it could definitely be switched out for a different flyer or even a Licky as the safe switch position, but I tend to prefer not running ABB style teams and running more ABC flexible teams or ABA teams. So overall, I felt that this trio ended up fitting my play style better and really helped showcase how Ludicolo can core break a lot of teams, even if I wasn't able to demonstrate the utility of Ice Beam. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. Thank you guys so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.